Greetings, I am Tom Earl, and this is my year of depth. We know you could be anywhere, so the fact that you are here today, sharing your greatest gifts, your time and energy, means the world to me. I hope you know that in this moment you are valued, you are loved, and you are appreciated just as you are. As you can see, we got ourselves a solo episode here today, and let's jump right in with a quote from one of my favorite books, one of my most gifted books, More Than Enough by Elaine Welteroth. So Elaine says this, here we go, reading from her book. Rarely do we talk openly about the tumult of the come up, the underside of a dream realized. Rarely do we share that even good things can sometimes play out in complicated, painful, and confusing ways. We feel pressure to post about the joy and the gratitude and the triumph of even the biggest moments in our lives. Promotions, graduations, engagements, marriages, even childbirth. Like it's all supposed to make us feel up, up, up. And we're supposed to keep quiet about the things that don't feel so good inside. But things aren't always as they appear. And even your biggest promotions can come along with some of your most bewildering blows. You know, there's a theme on some of these solo episodes, if you go back, that I want us to talk about the difficult conversations. I want us to jump in to the discomfort. Right now, we are in a transition between a year that carries a lot with it. And for a lot of us, we might right now be expected to go back, to return to quote unquote normal life, almost as if nothing has happened. But for many of us, it's impossible to return to what was because of what has been. And there are many times where we are expected to immediately go to the gratitude, to immediately put on that happy face. And so I want us to, every now and again here at the celebration, take time to sit inside the not the happy face, the not feeling grateful right now. Now, the other part of this is that oftentimes when we look at people who are successful and we start to compare, especially Instagram culture and all of these kind of things, we don't see the backstory. You hear a phrase sometimes that I worked years to be an overnight success or something like that. And so I want us to just today, during this episode, first of all, if you are feeling the pressure to step into this place where I'm happy, everything's all good, or you're being forced or required to move through a transition without there being a process for return, I just want to tell you that we got your back, and we want to validate, I want to validate the feelings that you're going through, that it is unfair, that it isn't right. And it's oftentimes because there isn't the recognition of the process, of the transition. Now, for my entrepreneurs out there, my aspiring artists, anybody who's really working towards a mission, what I want to share today is 3 stories with you that I hope create a reminder for you of this journey that we're all on, and that it's not always about constant up, 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 like Elaine started us off with. That there are going to be valleys, there are hardships, and that when we go through those things, it doesn't always have to be that I'm instantly grateful, that there are opportunities for us to sit in that. And yet still remind us, if you are in one of those valleys, that it is all a part of your origin story, your superhero story. So I want to share with you 3 stories. The first one comes from Famous Dave's barbecue sauce. Now, for me, I grew up with a bottle of Famous Dave's barbecue sauce inside my grandma's fridge. Whenever I'd go to her house and she'd make us something fun where we'd have barbecue sauce with it, I'd always know there would be a bottle's the right word, a bottle of Famous Dave's barbecue sauce. They also have different restaurants. Famous Dave's barbecue restaurants became this really, really popular chain restaurant. So in case you haven't heard of it, it is popular. So for those of you who haven't heard of Famous Dave's, international chain restaurant, super successful, really awesome. And so I want to tell you a little story about the founder, Famous Dave's Anderson. So way back when Dave was young, he started a flower company specializing in terrariums. And so I Googled terrariums. I have no idea what a terrarium is. And it's oftentimes a flower and soil arrangement inside a glass structure. Okay, so he first started off working for someone else, helping to sell terrariums on their behalf. And he got the entrepreneurial bug. He realized, I could be doing this myself. I'm really good at this. And so that's exactly what he did. So he went out and said, I'm going to do this myself. So he created all of his terrariums, and he went to different flower shops pitching his terrariums, right? Saying, hey, will you sell these for me? You take a cut, I take a cut. It's all good. So he finally found this one flower shop that said, yes, for Mother's Day, we will sell your terrariums. Get a bunch of them ready for me. Boom. So Dave got all of his flower arrangements set up, gave them to the flower shop. And Mother's Day happens to be the busiest day in the florist industry. And so what Dave did is he went to this flower shop that agreed to sell his terrariums, and he decided to help out. So the place was just packed with people. So, they were buying his terrariums, but they were buying all other kinds of flowers. And so what Dave did is he helped anywhere he could. He'd step behind the register. He'd help people pick out flowers. He said that he even helped clean the bathroom. I mean, he did every single thing he could to make that day awesome, not just for selling his product, but any product at that flower shop. Stayed until the place was closed, cleaned up, all of that kind of thing. So afterwards, as you can imagine, the person who owned the flower shop was impressed, was grateful, was saying to Dave, look, I mean, we sold out of your flowers, so I'm glad that I got them from you, but you went above and beyond today. You have to let me pay you for all of your help. And Dave was like, no, you don't need to pay me. I am grateful you took a bet on me. You're the first and only person who did. It's the least I can do to help out and return the favor. So what that ended up doing for Dave is it exponentially worked out in his favor, because the person went out and told all of his friends, any other flower shop, all the other florists that are in the florist network, like, hey, you got to check out this guy, Dave. He's a special kid. He stayed and helped me all day. He really goes above and beyond. And so this ended up spreading the word, and Dave was becoming quickly popular, to the point that his business was so popular that what he needed to do was to take out a loan so he could take his business to the next level. So he went and started applying for a loan. So this was in Chicago back in the early 70s. And everyone would say to him, hey, can we get do you have any assets? Do you have anything like this? And, as Dave describes it, he was a Native American in the 70s, and racism certainly played a role in this factor. Combined with his family, didn't really have any collateral, didn't really have any assets. And so people kept turning him down a loan. Everywhere he went, he couldn't get a loan. So this was really starting to stagnate his business. He was really at this place where he had this high demand. He needed a loan to take his business to the next level. And racism and all of these things were really holding back his opportunity to get this loan. So he went back to the original florist that took that bet on him, and he said, you know, what you should do, Dave, is I want you to go join your local chamber of commerce and get involved with start networking. So Dave joined his local chamber of commerce, and he said he quickly realized that it was kind of like a who's who of business in Chicago, that he really got to interface and connect with some really high up people in the business world in Chicago. So what did he do? He would show up early, volunteer, set up the chairs. He'd stay late and clean up. He'd help out anywhere he can. And just like with the florist shop, people took notice and they started to say, who's this Dave guy? And it really started to have people become aware of that he was a really special person. So what ended up happening was this local bank president said to Dave, hey, I really like how hard you work. I've seen your flower arrangements. I think you're doing a great job. We're having a family day at my bank, and I'm wondering, do you want to come and sell your product there? I think it'd be a good hit. So Dave's like, of course I do. I'm there. So the day arrives. Dave's got all his terrariums, his flower arrangements all set up in front of the bank, and very, very quickly he sells out completely. It's a huge, massive success. So he's cleaning up. The day is done, and the bank president goes over to him and says, Dave, come here. I want to talk to you. So now Dave's feeling like, okay, what did I do? Who did I upset? I'm feeling worried. So the bank president sits him down in his office and says, Dave, you went above and beyond for my customers. Everyone I talked to was thrilled. I really appreciate it. And Dave's like, whew, okay, thank God. He's like, yeah, well, it's my pleasure. I appreciate this opportunity. And so he says, Dave, I know you've been looking for a loan. So tell me, how much of a loan have you been looking for? And so Dave says, $10,000, looking for a loan of $10,000. And the bank president says, do you have any assets? Do you have any collateral? And Dave's like, oh, God, here we go again. He's like, no, I don't have any of those things. So the bank president, sits there and stares at Dave for a minute. And then he goes, all right, I trust you, Dave. Let's do this. Gives him the $10,000 loan. Dave's business is off to the races. Ends up creating this business from that loan. His business starts making $350,000 a year selling these flower arrangements, these terrariums. I can tell you that is huge, huge success. Dave is feeling great, just like feeling the best. This business is just going to keep on growing and growing and growing. And here's the thing, y'all. You don't know Dave. He's not famous Dave's terrarium. Famous Dave's barbecue sauce. So we all know something was about to happen. And what happened was the Chicago blizzard of 1979. You can Google it. Was this terrible blizzard. Everything was shut down. Really couldn't see anything. And everything just stalled. The whole world shut down in Chicago during that time. So everybody canceled their orders. People couldn't even get out of their house. And the blizzard actually shut Dave's business down. There wasn't any recovery from it. The impact of that blizzard completely shut down his business. And you can imagine that all the obstacles Dave had to go through just to get his business to the place where it was able to make $350,000 a year through the loans, through all the hard work, just to have something that's completely out of your control. Nature just destroy it all. You got to imagine how heartbreaking that must be. And I really recommend you go check out the rest of this. Is just a story. I heard this in the How I Built This with Guy Raz interview with Dave Anderson. And he really goes on to share just some incredible story. It just gets even more inspiring from there. Everything that he went through to eventually create Famous Dave's Barbecue, and then everything he went through in creating it. It's such a theme when you listen to entrepreneurial journeys that there are going to be hardships. It is part of the process. And for all of us, if you have a dream, if you have something you believe in, you're going to be tested somewhere along the way. Something is going to happen that is going to push the boundaries of our comfort zone. And so this is just one of the 3 stories that I want to share with you, that you're not alone, that what you're going through, you are in good company. If right now you are experiencing that setback, that push, and it doesn't mean you got to jump into the, okay, I'm feeling good, I'm fired up. Sit with the discomfort and just know you're not alone. I want to share with y'all another story. So I'm not sure if you have heard of Stacy Madison. Let me tell you Stacy Madison's story, y'all. Stacy Madison was living in Hawaii, and she was working for a restaurant there. And she was working like crazy. The restaurant was trying to expand. They were trying to become this really big thing. And everybody there was putting in tons of work to make it happen. And so what the restaurant kept promising is, hey, you keep working hard. You get us to this point that we need to get to, and you are going to get a bonus. So she's putting in the extra hours. She's working her butt off. Finally, the restaurant got to the place where it was meant to be. Time to get her bonus. What happens? They fire her. They fire her to avoid having to pay her bonus. So she's out in Hawaii, no family there, fired from the job that she just worked like crazy for months, left with nothing. So what she does is, her and her husband at the time, they moved to Boston. And they decide what they're going to do is get a food cart. Now, when I say food cart, I want to make sure you're not thinking of a food truck. The way she describes this is, I want you to think of like one of those hot dog carts or things you see people selling on, ice cream or something, an actual food cart, not a food truck. So she invests $5,000 in getting a food cart for the registration, supplies, signage, all of that. And her then husband at the time decide that what they're going to do is sell wraps. So, like you put food in a wrap it in pita bread, boom, you have a sandwich in pita bread. This is making me hungry. I want a falafel wrap now. So imagine, just fired from this job you worked super hard on, you invest $5,000 in this food cart, and you're selling wraps. Okay, awesome. You're in Boston doing your thing. So they're chugging along, lots of trial and error and ups and downs, just getting to this point. And what happens is they end up getting traction. And they get this good problem where people have to wait in long lines to get these wraps because they just have this little food cart. It's not like you can just turn this out super quick. So people are waiting in line for the food, and what they want to do is make sure that people don't leave the line, right? So they start thinking, how can we get people engaged? How can we keep people to stay waiting in line? So what they decided to do was to see, how can we solve this problem by combining it with another problem and solve them at the same time. So here's what happened is every single day they committed to using the freshest of ingredients. And so what that meant is they were using fresh pita bread every single day to make their sandwich wraps. And so at the end of each day, they'd have all this fresh pita bread that they were just throwing out because they weren't going to use it again the next day. That would break their values. And so they thought, okay, maybe we can solve these two problems at the same time. And so what they started to do was they chop up the fresh pita bread at the end of the day that they couldn't use. They chop it all up and they started to bake it, and it would make these pita chips. So then while people were waiting in line, instead of them getting frustrated, leaving the line, they said, hey, here's some free pita chips. People would eat these pita chips. They'd be super happy because they were so delicious, and they would be no longer, these disgruntled customers. It was great. But what they found is that people then started requesting, hey, can I specifically get these pita chips? Like these, your wraps are great, but I want these pita chips. And they'd say, well, that's not actually what we sell. I'm sorry. And then they're like, okay, whatever. Well, more and more people ask them, hey, can we get these pita chips? They realize, wow, this is actually what we need to start selling. And so Stacy's Pita Chips was born. And eventually they stopped selling the wraps altogether and put all of their time and energy into selling these pita chips. And I'm guessing by this point, you know what company I'm talking about, and that's Stacy's Pita Chips. Went on to become this super, super successful company. There's one more story about this that I want to tell. So many years later, they were doing millions of dollars in business, and PepsiCo approached them and said, we want to buy your company. They were like, that sounds amazing. So when Pepsi was going to do their final walkthrough and analysis of their factory and all these things, and they were going to finally strike the deal, like days before that was going to happen, there was this massive fire in Stacy's Pita Chips factory, and it destroyed almost 25% of the factory. And because it destroyed so much product, so much of their process, they almost lost the deal with Pepsi. And it was a really, really hard time, Stacy shares. It was a huge time of uncertainty. And instead of letting them, get them down, what they did is they just rallied everybody. They called in every single favor they possibly could. And within a matter of weeks, they had turned it all around. They had rebuilt all the parts of the factory they needed to. PepsiCo was amazed with how fast they were able to make everything happen. And in 2005, they sold Stacy's Pita Chips for $243 million to PepsiCo. Y'all, I love this story so much. This is another one that I got from How I Built This with Guy Raz. So if you haven't yet, I recommend going and checking that out. Few reasons that I like this one is that I am such a huge fan of process over product. Now, what does that mean? What that means is that we can find so many gifts, we can find so much within the process itself. But if we get focused on everything I'm doing, I can only do if I get this end result, and we completely ignore the process itself, if we completely just go to that tunnel mode, you might have been there yourself, where I'm willing to sacrifice all these things, and it doesn't matter how I get there as long as I get there. And it might not be so Machiavellian, but we can have this tendency to get tunnel vision. And everything we're doing is just to get to this final step. Now, if Stacy's Chips would have done that, they would have continued on this goal that they set out to become this sandwich empire. And we would have never heard of them. At least, maybe not. Maybe they would have been this huge sandwich thing. But because they were aware, because they were looking around as they were on this journey, they were able to see, okay, our original hypothesis that everybody wants these sandwiches, these pita wraps, and then solving one problem, and then solving the next problem, and then solving this next problem, and then through that process of just continually solving these challenges that come up, they get this epiphany. Actually, what people want are these pita chips. So many times, y'all, that big break, that answer, that aha, that friend, that relationship, that insight, it is right there just behind that problem that just came in front of us. And so if we can get that growth mindset that problems aren't here to attack us or to tear us down or to hold us back or the world's out to get us, that the problem might just be the prompt we needed to work through to get on the other side of it to this big aha that we didn't even know was there, that we wouldn't have realized, that we wouldn't have got to had that quote-unquote problem not popped up. The other thing I like about this story is it really goes back to how we started with the more than enough quote from Elaine Welteroth, that we usually just see the up, 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 up. We usually just see the Instagram moments of, yeah, sold my company, all of these kind of things. Rarely do we post the picture, my factory just burnt down, I think we're going to lose the deal. And it's in those moments that we need to get comfortable, especially asking for help. It's in those moments that we need to recognize that we're not alone, and reaching out to somebody like Stacy and her crew did, called in every favor to make it happen. Instead of trying to hide it, they announced it and tried to get anyone to help that they could, and it completely turned the game around. Now, I promised y'all 3 stories. Here's what happened, just happened right now. So I paused at just right now, where we're at now, I paused the recording and I listened back to the last thing I said. And what did I find? My microphone was messed up and was buzzing. So I lost 20 minutes of audio. Now I'm already running late, to be honest. So I'm already late, and now I realize I got to re-record this whole thing. And I was so frustrated. I was like, I am going to just throw this whole thing out. Forget this. Y'all don't even know how frustrating that is to have to re-record the whole thing all over again because a mic wasn't working. Then I thought, oh, okay, I hear you, God. Practice what I preach. Talking about process over product. Talking about failures can actually be a gift. Okay, let me go ahead and practice what I preach. Let me go ahead and have a growth mindset around it. And I'm so glad I did, because the re-recording of this is 1,000,000 times better than the original version. The ahas that I was even able to get myself about it being process over product. It was totally worth re-recording this, even if you'll never know how much better this version was than the other one. And maybe you're thinking, well, this one was pretty bad, Tom, so the other one has to just be absolutely terrible. But the gift I got in going through this and having to rethink, having to say it a second time, was a gift unto itself, y'all. So that's kind of my big takeaway right now is, first of all, if you're in one of those challenging situations, and a lot of us are being forced into a transition, into all these things, that it feels like we're rushing the processing part. We're rushing the part where it's like, okay, how are we going to do things differently? That if you're feeling that frustration, that people are trying to rush through it, you're probably totally right, y'all. That we need to get more comfortable with having difficult conversations. Whether it's a difficult conversation, actually talking about it, whether it's a challenge, the more we can really sit in the challenge, we can, instead of trying to rush the pain or the frustration, we can sit in it. That's when we're going to get these gifts. We're going to get these lessons. We're going to get these insights, all of these beautiful things from just holding that space and seeing what's here. And so wherever it is in your life right now that you are possibly shying away from the discomfort, possibly shying away from the pain, shying away from the frustration, when you're able to, in a safe way, I recommend sitting it just a little bit longer. Maybe it's going for a walk and thinking it through. Maybe it's sitting down with somebody in a park and talking about it. Whatever that is, have that difficult conversation with yourself, with someone else, about it. Let it out. My friends, this has been an absolute blessing sitting here with you today. I'm so grateful. If you want additional resources on some of the things that we talked about today, especially applying them to marketing, we do have some great resources for you that you can find. tomearl.me/ads, ADS. tomearl.me/ads. We got some great resources for there, y'all, especially if you're looking to apply the power of storytelling to marketing and ads. Y'all, this has been such a blessing. Another great solo episode with you. I'm praying when I go listen to the playback here in a second that my microphone wasn't screwed up again. So we're hoping this is the final take. Either way, if you enjoyed this today, it would mean the world to me if you could share with me your thoughts. You can send me an email, tom@tomearl.com, or all social medias @TomEarlArtist. I appreciate you. Looking forward to having you join us once again next week. And my invitation to you as we close is to reiterate that I'd like to invite you to become more comfortable with the discomfort. to find the ability to spend time and to sit in the challenge and the frustration and the pain and to sit through it, because there is a gift waiting on the other side. And if we find the ability to, instead of trying to rush that process, to ignore it, to get it done as quickly as possible, and instead embrace the process, that there is something waiting for you there that is truly going to be a gift. And so, my friends, I'm wishing you all the best. And as always, I'm wishing you peace and blessings. Thank you.
One more thing. I'd love to continue the conversation. Feel free to join me at tomearl.com/join. Subscribe below, or let's connect on social media. Tom Earl Artist. Thanks again for watching.